No, this essay isn't about Starlight Glimmer. Or at least it's not about Starlight Glimmer dressing in red and flooding Equestria with hordes of red-dressed, brainwashed assault rifle-wielding minions. Although I do promise we'll circle back around to Starlight eventually. But the point is, this essay isn't about communism, not the internet meme version of communism anyway. There will be no Soviet anthem blaring or renaming YouTube to OurTube. If you ask 10 people what Marxism is, you will get 10 different answers. As such, I'm going to start by clearing the air a bit by defining Marxist literary theory and explaining a bit about what I'm intending to do here. I apologize in advance if this section gets a bit dense. I will try to keep the tone and readability of this essay kind of informal and colloquial so it's entertaining and understandable. But the truth of the matter is that this essay exists because I've long wanted to English major Friendship is Magic, so there will be a bit of English majoring. Marxist literary theory is derived from Marx's concepts of base and superstructure. Marxism defines the base of a society as the economic means of production in a society. The superstructure can be defined as human institutions and ideologies that produce art and literary texts. The superstructure, including literature, such as Friendship is Magic, is a natural outgrowth of the base. Marxist literary theory seeks to examine the way that class and class conflicts function in a fictional text as outgrowths of the economic conflicts in the society that produced said text. A central tenet of Marxism is the belief that human history, and by extension human conflict, can be understood through the lens of dialect materialism, which posits that all things develop through material contradictions. In other words, plants, animals, humans, and societies develop, evolve, or are brought to extinction when there is a contradiction between material needs and material reality. This concept gives rise to the idea of historical materialism, which posits that all of human history boils down to the struggle to fulfill material needs. Class conflict is therefore the motor of history. Marxist literary theory seeks to examine the ways in which these class struggles manifest in the literary texts of a society. Friendship is Magic is a show primarily made for children with a strong escapist appeal. As such, it is prone to shy away from heavier topics such as class struggle. However, scattered through this show are subtle references to class struggles that largely reflect the society that produced the show. Written and produced by authors, actors, animators, and executives from Canada and the United States, Friendship is Magic is part of the superstructure of a deeply capitalist society. This essay aims to examine the ways in which the show replicates, reflects, ignores, or challenges the class struggles that underpin the capitalist society that produced the text. Because so many different individuals had their hands on the show during its 9-year runtime, examining this text is a different process than examining a text created by a single author. The beliefs, attitudes, and agendas of different writers, creators, and their corporate overseers vary wildly. As such, the class struggles reflected in the fictional land of Equestria can, at times, seem contradictory and schizophrenic. However, because the show had so many different actors, examining it holistically gives us an opportunity to see a more complex reflection of the superstructure of the society that produced the text than we could see in a text written by a single individual. Common themes throughout episodes written by different people present good opportunities to examine the way that the show, through a secondary world fantasy, reflects the class struggles of our own world. I'll forward all of this by saying that I love Friendship is Magic. Escapism is one of the main appeals of the show, and I love that this show presents a world in which love, friendship, and tolerance always win at the end of the day. Equestria is a utopia, but there are cracks in the utopia. By pointing out these cracks, I do not intend to disparage the show or pass any sort of judgment about its quality. This essay comes from a place of love. Because I love this show, I think it is worth close scrutiny. And scrutiny shows us that our own world and its woes bleed into Equestria through the cracks in the utopia. Because the story of Friendship is Magic takes place in a secondary world fantasy, any discussion about the class struggles in the show must be put into context by examining in what ways the fictional of Equestria mirrors or does not mirror the economy of the society that produced the text. Equestria has a currency system, with the primary currency being small gold coins called bits. Gemstones are also used, either as a secondary currency or as bartering tokens. Because currency is used, we can confidently say that Equestria does not practice communism as Marx envisioned it. Communism aims to dissolve the existence of capital or currency in any form. Many countries throughout history have been communist-leaning countries or communist-aiming countries, in that they sought, allegedly, to eventually transition to Marx's currency-absent version of communism, but still used currency while transitioning to that end state, the most infamous example being, of course, the USSR. However, we are fairly safe in saying that Equestria is not a communist-aiming state either, because there is no mention in the show of any means of production being owned by the state. Rather, means of production, such as Rarity's Boutique, Sweet Apple Acres, or Cheese Sandwich's Comedy Factory, are owned by individuals with no evidence of government regulations or support. Equestria's economy, therefore, would be best described as capitalist, which may be defined as economic systems in which land and produced means of production, the capital stock, are owned by private individuals or groups of private individuals organized as firms. The existence of an equestrian economic system is not insignificant to the show's central narrative, because the 6 primary characters are working adults with jobs. In spite of being a kids' show, Friendship is Magic chooses to work with a selection of characters who have careers, and some of those characters have career aspirations that are realized throughout the show. Rarity is a private business owner who operates a single fashion boutique that turns into a fashion empire by the end of the show. Rainbow Dash begins the show as a lowly weather control Pegasus before working her way up to her desired career of an aerial stunts pony. Applejack and her family own and operate an apple farm. Pinkie Pie has hired help at a bakery. Not all of the characters' careers are as straightforward as these, however. Twilight Sparkle is Celestia's personal student, and it seems that her full-time vocation at the start of the show is to learn about friendship and to report her findings to Celestia. Presumably, her day-to-day needs are seen to by Celestia. She does, however, live in a library, so one could read between the lines and conclude that she spends at least some of her time running the library, which seems to double as a public institution and as Twilight's personal dwelling space. Fluttershy's career is even more difficult to pin down. She spends her time taking care of forest animals on the outskirts of Ponyville. How she meets her material needs is unclear. In the first episode, she is ordered or perhaps commissioned to prepare a chorus of birds to perform at Celestia's arrival in Ponyville, which was possibly something she was paid to do. It is conceivable that she does similar things off-screen. The episode Winter Wrap-Up also indicates that the ponies take care of the animals in the world around them, treating them like pets or children rather than autonomous creatures. This implies that the ponies feel a collective responsibility to care for the wildlife. It is entirely possible to read between the lines and assume that Fluttershy's activities are funded by the government as part of that collective responsibility. However, the ambiguous nature of Fluttershy's income does bring attention to the fact that the show is typically not concerned with how characters' material needs are met. The show's silence regarding Fluttershy's income speaks volume. Her work is absolutely non-essential to the equestrian economy, but she has no need to stress about her financial situation. She is not presented as being above or outside or exempt from Equestria's economic systems. Fluttershy had to haggle over food prices and putting your hoof down, and had to borrow money from Applejack to get a train ride back to Ponyville after spending all the bits she had on her on an impulsive purchase in the best gift ever. But economic hardship is not presented as a recurring problem for her. Neither is it presented as a recurring problem for most characters. Economic conflict may be the motor of history in Marxist literary theory, but it takes a back seat in Equestria as presented to us. This does, however, naturally bring our attention to the sparse places where economic hardship and class struggle are portrayed, explicitly or implicitly. These places stick out like pink pastel ponies on a gray rock farm. And speaking of farms, it seems that the reasonable place to begin the deep dive is with the one character whose vocation is completely essential to the equestrian economy, who is ironically portrayed as the only character in the show who repeatedly experiences financial anxiety and instability. You know who I'm talking about. The one, the only, Applejack. Applejack's desire for money is introduced to the audience of Friendship is Magic almost as early as Applejack is introduced to the audience. Within the first 3 minutes of the first episode beyond the pilot two-parter, Applejack expresses her desire to go to the Equestrian Grand Galloping Gala in order to sell her Apple products and acquire money for her family business. She fantasizes about all of these saggy old things she could replace with the funds she could raise, such as her barn's saggy old roof, and her brother's saggy old plow, and her grandmother's father's saggy old hip. The last example is particularly worth noting because it indicates that quality of life enhancing surgery is not a universal right in Equestria, but is a paid service that is outside of the financial reaches of the Apple family. Granny Smith's hip is never addressed again, however, leaving us to wonder if the hip was replaced off-screen, if it was never replaced and continued to bother Granny Smith to the day of her death, or if the issue was intentionally or accidentally dropped by the writers of the show. The Grand Galloping Gala is the closest thing that the first season of Friendship is Magic has to an overarching season-long plot, due to the slice-of-life, episodic nature of the show. The first season opens and closes with the Grand Galloping Gala, placing Applejack's desire for economic security at the center of her first season's character arc, although this arc is only addressed in a handful of episodes. Although the Apple family's financial problems take a back seat post-Season 1, the conflict remains unsolved. The most notable example of this conflict after Season 1 is in the episode Super Speedy Cider Squeezy 6000, in which a pair of entrepreneurs threaten to drive the Apple family farm out of business by competing with them for cider sales. During this episode, the entrepreneurs offer an unfair business deal with the apples, offering to use industrial technology to rapidly convert their apples into cider at a 75-25 split of the profits, with the apples on the losing end of the deal. In a family huddle, Applejack makes the following remark.
Cider sales keep our business afloat through the winter. We'd lose sweet apple acres if we agree to this.
The idea of the Apple family losing their farm is revisited in the episode Magical Mystery Cure, in which the cutie marks of Twilight's friends are accidentally swapped by magic, leading to Pinkie Pie temporarily taking Applejack's place on her farm. This infamously rushed episode does not have the time to flesh out the conflicts it introduces and takes no time to explain itself, but in between song stanzas, Twilight rallies her friends to help Pinkie Pie rediscover her true talents and her true identity. She briefly says Pinkie Pie's about to lose the apple farm, implying that Pinkie Pie's inability to act as a satisfactory replacement for Applejack has temporarily put the farm into a state of financial crisis. Although only briefly touched on, these throwaway lines about the Apple family being in danger of losing their farm beg the question, to whom are they losing it? Who owns the farm? Are the Apples renting it? Are they in debt? Who in Equestria has the power to take away the home and workplace of the Apple family? In the episode Family Appreciation Day, we are told that the Apple family actually founded Ponyville. By all rights, the land should belong to them. So why does it not? Of course, these are questions that simply do not have answers, but what the show doesn't tell us speaks as loudly as what it does tell us. The show tells us that the Apple family is financially unstable and that their own land does not belong to them. It does not tell us why, but it doesn't necessarily need to, because the idea of agrarian poverty is so deeply ingrained into the American collective conscience that the audience is willing to accept its existence without question. Farmers are poor. This fictional trope is so prolific because it maps onto historical realities. But there is nothing natural about the poverty of farmers. Farmers are poor due to over-exploitation and unfair capitalist power dynamics. Of all of the possible economic activities that can be done, farming is the most essential. Farmers are not dispensable. There is no reason for them to be poor. Because all of society benefits from their work, they should be compensated appropriately, but farmers have historically been impoverished by unfair and unnatural capitalist power dynamics. Applejack's precarious financial situation is particularly interesting when juxtaposed against characters like Fluttershy. Fluttershy's work is entirely non-essential, yet she does not have to struggle financially the same way that Applejack does. The audience is left to come to its own conclusions about why Applejack's position is the way that it is, but I personally suspect it is merely a reflection of our own society bleeding into the world of Equestria. The writers of My Little Pony did not write in a vacuum, and their work was influenced by the ideas present in the society they were raised in. Farmers are poor is not an immutable fact, nor is it a natural state of affairs. This fact deserves to be scrutinized and challenged. Just as interesting as this end of the social and economic spectrum is the opposite end. If Applejack, and perhaps farmers generally, are towards the bottom of the equestrian economic ladder, who is on the other extreme? The journey towards and through the social elite of Equestria is best exemplified by another character, whose early season arcs center around breaking into the equestrian social elite, our favorite local dressmaker, Rarity. If Applejack is our window into Equestria's lower class, Rarity is our window into Equestria's upper class. Breaking into the high society of Equestria is one of Rarity's earliest ambitions, particularly in the earlier seasons. Though rich and upper-class individuals can be found in many towns in Equestria, there is one town that stands out as being almost symbolic or allegorical, in the sense that it seems to be an entire city of upper-class elites, and that town is Canterlot. The capital of Equestria and a primarily unicorn city, Canterlot is consistently portrayed as being full of ponies with a better-than-you attitude. These ponies quite literally walk around with their noses in the air. One specific episode that takes a look at Rarity's attempts to break into this social elite is Sweet and Elite. In this episode, Rarity meets ponies with over-the-top, rich nobility-coded names like Fancy Pants and Upper Crust. These ponies are never seen doing any sort of economic activity or labor, and instead occupy their time with nobility-coded social events such as charity auctions, well-mannered parties, and art gallery openings. Rarity attracts the social attention of this upper crust by a combination of her sharp fashion sense and the fact that she is staying at Canterlot Castle, a privilege she is granted by virtue of being vicarious friends with Princess Celestia through Twilight Sparkle. Of course, many questions remain unanswered about this social elite. Why do they seem to have the wealth to sustain themselves without needing to participate in any sort of economic activities or labor? Where did their wealth come from? What forces gatekeep ponies from accessing this social elite? There is nothing natural or necessary or inevitable about the consolidation of wealth. Capital, or money, is a social construct. Hunter-gatherer societies were historically able to create material goods and wealth without needing an imaginary monetary system to motivate them. Actual wealth, i.e. material goods, is usually produced by the lower and middle classes, and that wealth is stolen away from them by people who have imagined social power. What forces enable this Canterlot elite to steal wealth from those who produce it? We can only assume that the economic systems of Equestria mirror our own in this aspect. What is particularly fascinating about the episode Sweet and Elite is the way in which Canterlot's upper elite is contrasted against Ponyville specifically. When asked about where Rarity got her hat by social elite ponies who have clearly taken an interest in it in a positive way, it comes out, to Rarity's chagrin, that she is from Ponyville. This fact is revealed by being recognized by a fellow citizen of Ponyville, an Earth pony whose over-the-top accent I can only call redneck, who is notably one of the only ponies ever seen in Canterlot doing any sort of productive labor or economic activity, in this case, cleaning windows. Annoyingly, this character is also portrayed as stupid, clumsy, and socially oblivious, which are stereotypes about rural people and manual laborers that I'd like to see buried. Upon realizing her Ponyville origins, the interested elite make an about-face on their opinion of her hat, dismissing it as country and walking away with a pretentious huff and their noses turned up into the air. This is the start of a recurring conflict in this episode, in which Rarity feels the need to hide or deny her connections to Ponyville, and to her friend group specifically, in order to be accepted into Canterlot's upper crust. If Applejack's storyline is introduced the general concept of farmers are poor, this storyline takes it and runs a marathon with it. Equestria's class ladder seems to be very clearly divided on urban and rural lines. What is perhaps more disturbing to the discerning viewer, however, is the racially coded nature of equestrian wealth and social status. This merits a deeper discussion. Ponyville is a town founded by Earth ponies, and Earth ponies make up the majority of its population. Canterlot, however, is a town established by and inhabited by unicorns. To call this a racial divide seems a bit sketchy, because the pony types or breeds or tribes are not direct one-to-one correlations to the human concept of race. However, the episode Hearthwarming Eve does tell us that the pony tribes began as separate and semi-independent societies. The different pony types seem to largely have their own towns or segments of Equestria where they are found in greater numbers, and they seem to have vague cultural distinctions. The different pony types are all the same species as well, as they are capable of reproducing with ponies of other types. In a lot of ways, they do seem to map, in a very vague sense, onto our concept of race. The forces that created or maintain the seeming racial power divide between rural earth ponies and urban unicorns are ill-explored, but Equestria's capital, and all of the advisory positions to the crown, are inhabited almost exclusively by wealthy unicorns, while impoverished agrarian earth ponies are seemingly barred from positions of political or social power. Perhaps even more damning is the fact that the School of Magic is personally overseen by Equestria's ruler, Princess Celestia, and Princess Celestia elected to take her personal student, and by extension Equestria's future ruler, from a Canterlot-based, unicorn-only school. Earth ponies, on the other hand, are vaguely hinted at as being the only ponies capable of farming. Hearthwarming Eve tells us that the unicorns and the Pegasi took food that only earth ponies could grow from the earth ponies in exchange for manipulating the weather and the sun and moon for favorable crop-growing conditions. At sparse and scattered points throughout the show, earth ponies are vaguely hinted at as having some sort of connection to the earth, or perhaps some sort of enhanced physical strength that makes them uniquely qualified for farming. However, whatever these abilities may be are poorly defined. No earth pony is ever shown to have any sort of magical connection with the earth or plants in a meaningful way, and in terms of physical strength, Rainbow Dash, a Pegasus, is consistently shown to be one of the physically strongest characters in the show. There doesn't seem to be anything that actually makes earth ponies better at farming than any other pony. But from Pinkie Pie's Family Rock Farm to Sweet Apple Acres to Appaloosa, farming is shown to be an activity carried out exclusively by earth ponies. And because farming and rural living in general are consistently shown to be a lower-class economic activity in Equestria, this locks many earth ponies into implied poverty. What's even more disturbing is that the clear social, political, and wealth power divides that exist along racial lines in Equestria are never addressed. No pony seems to be bothered by the racial wealth gap, it is never called out, and it is never reduced. In fact, the show's epilogue shows Twilight Sparkle choosing her personal student, and by implication future successor, from the same unicorn-only magic school that she took over from Celestia, implying a continuation of the cyclic power dynamics that keep unicorns on top. What is not clear to the audience is whether the wealth divide amongst the pony races is caused by, or merely exacerbated by, the differences in physical abilities between the ponies. Pegasi can fly and manipulate weather. Unicorns have magic. The magic of unicorns seemingly has limitless potential, as shown by the incredible feats of magic demonstrated by Twilight Sparkle and Starlight Glimmer. We are told in the first season that most unicorns only know how to use 1 or 2 spells related to their Cutie Mark's special talent, but the show introduced so many unicorns to the audience whose special talent was magic — Twilight Sparkle, Starlight Glimmer, Sunburst, Star Swirl, and Trixie — that it became almost standard as the show progressed, with more narratively important unicorns having a magic-related talent than not. Even unicorns who had no express talent with magic were shown doing impressive feats of magic in the later seasons, such as Sweetie Belle teleporting or background ponies shooting lasers out of their horns. Whatever limitations on unicorn magic the early seasons may have attempted to establish seem to have been forgotten over time, making unicorns vastly capable en masse compared to other ponies. The show does give us more than one instance of wealthy earth ponies, Gladmane and Filthy Rich, for example, so it is not impossible for earth ponies to become wealthy in Equestria. However, social, geographical, vocational, and physical differences between the pony races do seem to all contribute to a general trend. Earth ponies are poor and rural, unicorns are urban and wealthy, and Pegasi are in the clouds kind of doing their own thing. This racial power divide gives us a window to see a capitalist fiction play out in a fictional world, the myth of meritocracy. The myth of meritocracy is a phrase coined by sociologist Alan Fox in 1956 and popularized by sociologist Michael Dunlop Young in 1958 that denotes the way in which capitalism falsely markets itself as a system where anyone can have upwards social mobility. Capitalism markets itself as being a meritocratic system in which anyone can succeed based purely on personal competency and work ethic, but capitalism uses artificial barriers based on immutable individual characteristics, like race or sex, to bar certain people from success in order to keep power consolidated in the hands of the few. A similar system seems to be at play in Equestria. The race of a pony is not, however, the only immutable characteristic that seems to have bearing on their placement in the caste system. The next topic of examination is an immutable personal characteristic that is completely unique to this world and has no real-world equivalent: cutie marks. Cutie marks are a colorful mark that appears on a pony's butt, typically during their childhood. A cutie mark appears when a pony discovers their special talent, a thing that they are so passionate about that it is identity-forming. Many different cutie marks and associated tasks or labors exist in the world of Equestria, such as a love for beauty and the finer things of life for Rarity, taking care of animals for Fluttershy, or apple farming for Applejack. However, from an economic perspective, some cutie marks are simply better than others. The first pony I'd like to address is Filthy Rich. Of course, we couldn't have an essay about the economics in Equestria without talking about the pony who has bags of money on his butt. What he actually does as his vocation is mostly unclear. His personality and his talent are, apparently, simply being rich. I can't think of a more cut-and-dry example of one's caste destiny being so clearly defined by an immutable personal characteristic. I don't have much to say about him because we simply know very little about where his fortune comes from, but he is a great example of the way in which cutie marks can become tied to economic destiny. Another interesting case is his daughter, Diamond Tiara. Diamond Tiara is consistently portrayed as a vitriolic and poisonous personality who uses her social influence and wealth to get her way. She bullies the Cutie Mark Crusaders relentlessly, going so far as to pick on Scootaloo for being disabled, and she rules the elementary school through tyranny and fear by hoarding embarrassing secrets about her classmates. And yet, in the episode Crusaders of the Lost Mark, it is revealed that she did not understand the meaning of her cutie mark, a tiara, when it first appeared on her butt. She felt locked in to being mean and abusive to control other ponies and to win socially by both the expectations of her parents and the cutie mark on her butt that she did not understand. Only after having a change of heart did she begin to consider that her cutie mark might indicate a form of leadership that was based in friendship and kindness. Diamond Tiara is an interesting example of the ways in which a pony's cutie mark might not only shape how other ponies perceive them, but also how they perceive themselves. Diamond Tiara's story indicates that there may be a complex interplay between a pony's personality and their cutie mark, and that their cutie mark might inform their personality and their decisions about vocation, just as much as their personality informs their cutie mark. Cutie marks may be a form of self-fulfilled prophecy in this sense. Diamond Tiara and Filthy Rich both contribute to the idea that class status may be reinforced by one's cutie mark if one's class status becomes integral to one's identity. But a different angle of looking at cutie marks is in what ways a cutie mark is monetizable. For ponies who aren't born into generational wealth, a useful cutie mark might be the ticket to greater wealth. An example of a pony whose cutie mark is not easily monetizable is Pinkie Pie. Her cutie mark, her special talent, and her passion are for parties. She likes to throw parties, but her day-to-day job is working as hired help in a bakery that she does not own. Her job is perhaps tangentially related to her cutie mark. Parties need baked goods, after all, but her cutie mark is not easily monetizable, and thus she needed to take a real job in order to pay the bills. The character with perhaps the most problematic cutie mark is Twilight Sparkle. Twilight Sparkle is consistently afforded privilege after privilege due to her cutie mark and the special talent and destiny that is associated with it. Her cutie mark indicates that her special talent is a particular aptitude with magic. Her magic is so powerful and so limitless that she can do practically anything that any pony else can do, and she can do it better than them. She can use telekinesis to lift things that would be too heavy for even the strongest of Earth ponies, and she can use teleportation to travel from place to place faster than the fastest of Pegasi. This, of course, would afford her economic opportunities that simply aren't available to other ponies. An infamous example of this is in episode 4 of the show, in which she uses telekinesis to pluck the apples from an entire field of apple trees in a moment, instantaneously performing labor that probably would have taken Applejack hours. This is in spite of the fact that Applejack's cutie mark should, in theory, make her uniquely good at farming. And this is in spite of the show's repeated insistence that only Earth ponies can farm for amorphous and ill-defined reasons. Another great instance of how Twilight's cutie mark could grant her economic privilege is in the episode No Second Prances. This episode is actually about a different unicorn, Starlight Glimmer, but it is a good example of the unhinged economic implications of magic as powerful as Twilight's. In an effort to make friends with a distracted Mrs. Cake, the same baker that Pinky works for, Starlight created a cake with magic almost instantaneously. When the distracted Mrs. Cake looked up, her reaction was one of surprise and horror as she exclaimed,
"Wowza, wowza! Are you trying to put me out of business with your fancy magic thingy? What's a cake?"
In a moment, Mrs. Cake came to terms with the reality that there are unicorns out there who can do everything she can do faster and better than her with zero training. In a world where unicorns as powerful as Twilight Sparkle exist, every pony's job is at risk. The only reason that Twilight Sparkle or Starlight Glimmer haven't put Mrs. Cake out of business is because they have simply not chosen to do so. Perhaps even more disturbing than Twilight's unhinged personal abilities are the ways in which her abilities afford her opportunities that no pony else can access. From the start of the show, she is Celestia's personal student. That is, she has an immediate and personal access to the monarchy. The reason? She's good at magic. Celestia personally oversees the unicorn-only School of Magic, and she took Twilight under her wing in the exact moment that she demonstrated her enormous magical potential when she got her Cutie mark. Twilight's position gives her both financial security and power. For example, she is easily able to procure tickets to Equestria's prime social event, the Grand Galloping Gala, for her friends, which her cash-starved farmer friend sees as a godsend business opportunity, and which Rainbow Dash sees as an opportunity to advance her career by getting in with the Wonderbolts. She also uses her personal relationship with Celestia to get Rarity a room in the Canterlot Castle in Suite and Elite, a key factor in Rarity's climb up the social ladder in Equestria. Twilight's position also directly leads to her eventual ascension to the throne. From the beginning of the show, Celestia was preparing Twilight for greater leadership roles in Equestria, starting with her ascension to being a princess and ending with her ascension to being Equestria's single ultimate ruler. Although Twilight certainly experienced a lot of character growth and eventually became the sort of personality who would make a good ruler, she didn't start out that way. Her position as Celestia's personal pet project and eventual successor was not based on any sort of character merit. At the beginning of the show, Twilight was abrasive, socially detached, and absorbed in her studies, not exactly leadership material. Celestia chose a successor who was good at magic, and then molded that successor into a leader. The privileges afforded to Twilight by her Cutie mark and her associated talent are so staggeringly unfair and anti-egalitarian that it makes one question the merit of the entire Cutie mark system. How can a society be a happy utopia when such incredible power and privilege is afforded to the select few based on an immutable characteristic? Such questions were explored, in a way, through an equally powerful unicorn who chose a different, darker path. I hinted at her at the beginning. It's finally time to deliver on the promise. It's time to talk about Starlight Glimmer. Given the unfair advantages afforded to certain ponies based on their cutie marks, one begins to wonder if cutie marks are an inherently divisive and problematic concept. Such ideas were not often explored by in-world characters, but there is one glaring exception, Starlight Glimmer. The episode that introduces Starlight Glimmer and her ideology, the Cutie map, is an interesting one from an aesthetic perspective. The core cast of characters makes their way to a town that appears, on a very surface-level glance, to be a happy utopia. All of the houses are identical. All of the ponies have the same cutie mark, an equal sign. They all dress similarly and cut their hair similarly. They are all smiling incessantly. But of course, the smiles are fake. The town is actually ruled by fear, full of secretly miserable ponies who want out, and controlled by the powerful and domineering Starlight Glimmer, who is the only pony who has secretly retained her cutie mark in order to use her overwhelmingly powerful magic to rob ponies of their cutie marks and control them. Interestingly, removing a pony's cutie mark also removes aspects of their personality. Pinkie Pie is no longer able to enjoy sweets or even discern good ones from bad ones when her cutie mark is taken away, and Applejack's countryisms fade from her mind. After being taken hostage and having their cutie marks taken away, the core cast of characters are locked in a room and subjected to a blaring PA announcing the most cliché and rote egalitarian propaganda imaginable. In sameness, there is peace. Exceptionalism is a lie. Free yourself from your cutie mark. Choose equality over your special talent. What is most striking to me about this episode is the way in which it replicates the aesthetic trappings of anti-communist Cold War American propaganda. The tyranny and despotism at play here is so on the nose that it feels like a Cold War cartoon. It feels quite a bit like 1984, in fact. I do not make that comparison in a positive way. In spite of being a critically acclaimed masterpiece, my personal opinion on 1984 takes after that of Isaac Asimov, who believed that it was an abysmally bad piece of science fiction because it portrayed a world that was so outlandishly, cartoonishly exaggerated in its despotism that such a society would fracture immediately. I personally feel that 1984 was a shallow criticism of communism, more a piece of propaganda than a piece of literature. What's particularly interesting about the Cutie map is the way in which it intentionally leans into the Cold War origins that it is an obvious parody of. Starlight Glimmer holds all of the village's cutie marks behind a giant magical screen that is broken by the villagers in a scene that is intentionally and directly a mirror of the infamous Apple Macintosh 1984 ad, solidly and intentionally making homage to the episode's inspiration. The problem with this episode is the same problem as that anti-communist propaganda has. It boils criticism of capitalism and egalitarian principles down into strawman ideologies. Starlight Glimmer is an example of a much wider fictional trope. The villain who kind of has a point but is actually a sociopath, so their point is invalid. As previously discussed, there may actually be some unsettling economic inequalities that are created by cutie marks. To challenge the cutie mark system in some way seems like a reasonable thing to do, but as it is slowly revealed that many ponies are unhappy with their lives in this commune, that Starlight is lying to her followers about her own cutie mark, and as she revokes the agency of the core characters and tries to force them to conform into her society by taking their cutie marks away by force, taking them hostage, and force-feeding them propaganda, the conflict of the episode shifts away from whatever ideological challenge Starlight may have presented to the system in power, and towards stopping the psycho villain in a dramatic showdown. This trope happens in stories with frightening regularity. I personally consider it to be a lazy storytelling method, introducing an ideological challenge to the status quo and then leaving that challenge unaddressed by shifting the audience's attention to a conflict about stopping a psychopath who is using their ideology as a cloak for gaining personal power is not a satisfying setup and payoff. I will refer to this method of storytelling as the ideological strawman. It's a strawman because the ideology of the villains in these stories is never meant to be engaged with genuinely. Instead, their ideologies are meant to be dismissed, because their ideologies are meant to give the story the aesthetic appearance of moral depth or complexity, while boiling the story down to a good versus evil showdown by having the villain turn out to be a psychopath in disguise. Unfortunately, this trope may be so common because it mirrors real life. The Cutie map draws from anti-communist propaganda for its aesthetic inspiration. Ironically, the story of the Cold War actually mirrors the ideological strawman trope frighteningly well. Joseph Stalin was the ultimate real-life example of the ideological strawman. He commandeered the egalitarian principles of Marxism into a tool for forwarding his own power. He was an absolute psychopath and a complete madman, and thus presented his own enemies with a very easy route to dismissing the ideology of Marx as a farce. However, in both real life and in fiction, the strawman ideology is a useful propaganda tool because it allows one to dismiss ideas without engaging with them. For the example of Starlight Glimmer specifically, it is later revealed that her aversion to cutie marks was caused primarily by childhood trauma, completely dismissing the possibility that her commune was founded off of any sort of genuine commitment to an actual, well-thought-through ideology. The flimsiness of Starlight's ideological grounding gives the audience a very easy and convenient way to dismiss the idea that the status quo may have problems, that the cutie mark system may be inherently anti-egalitarian, and that some sort of social change may benefit Equestria. In a very similar way, the propaganda that the Cutie map is parodying gives citizens of capitalist systems a very convenient way to dismiss any sort of criticism of capitalism. The woes of capitalist societies are thus portrayed as either inconsequential or as a necessary evil, the only viable alternative to the cartoonishly despotic and unrealistically tyrannical societies portrayed in propaganda like 1984. Genuine change and actual criticism of the myth of meritocracy are painted in an overly broad brushstroke of either unrealistic naivety or ill-intentioned tyrannical ambition. Well, that was a doozy. So Equestria has some problems. There are some unfair economic power dynamics at play in our favorite cartoon horse show. That was a lot of overanalyzing, deconstructing, and overly academic English majoring of a cartoon horse show for children. To what end? What is the point of all this? Hopefully, this was a fun little exercise that has given us a better understanding of a silly little show that we know and love. By exposing some of the cracks in the equestrian utopia, maybe we can engage with this fantasy world on a slightly deeper level. But maybe what was more valuable were the things that we learned about our own world along the way, by examining the reflection of our own world's problems in the cracks in the equestrian utopia. Or maybe this was all just a big waste of time, and we should have been listening to the Soviet national anthem the entire time.
Quiet!